Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works, and we're back to work on corporate flyers, which means we're working on the Lockheed Vega by AMT and the Dassault Falcon 10 by Hasegawa. Get the boxes out of the way. And last time we got the interiors basically completed, and we got the fuselage halves glued together. So as you can see, we have the main entryway here, so I try to get the light into it, which there's almost nothing going on in there, and then the cabin is actually complete, but we'll probably never be able to see inside those windows. Oh well. Such as with putting the interior in any aircraft. Same thing with the Vega. I've gone and put some chairs in there, and I've also put a complete cockpit in there, which was scratch built. So, time to move on to more of the large gross assembly. As you can see here, this of course is the wing for the Falcon. No, sorry, it's the wing for the Vega. And all of this filler is, the way that AMT chose to have this glued together is, instead of having it come together on the trailing edge, they chose to have it come together here. So this is all, to me, a putty. It looks like worse than it really is. I'll be giving it a light sanding to start off with. Now, while we're waiting for the main wings, the various fillers and glues to dry, I'm going to put together the tail feathers. So here is our vertical tail. Then we've got the horizontal surfaces. As you can see, there's a little bit of flash here. I don't think it's anything too worrisome. Shouldn't give us any trouble at all. Now, working in parallel with the Vega, I'm also getting some work done on the Falcon here. And as you can see, we have a seam running along the top and the nose. So I'm going to start trying to knock that down. Hopefully I won't have to use too much filler. There's a little bit of a step here. Definitely a step there and there. But if we can knock most of that down with sanding rather than having a filler, that would be a big help. Now for this, I'm just going to gently run my knife along the top and see if I can even that out. There's not a whole lot of panel lines to mess up here, so we should be fairly safe. This wing has been given an initial sanding, and I'm not going to bother priming it with gray paint yet, because I can already feel some areas that I need another coat of filler. But I will be putting a little bit of gray paint on just to make sure that the seam doesn't end up showing. But that's not a big deal, because I'm going to be priming the entire plane with flat testers white before I apply whichever yellow I try to use. And you can see I've put a piece of white styrene here between where the top wings came together. And that's mainly because there was enough of a gap that I knew that if I put filler in there, that it would tend to, that the two parts of the wing would tend to do this, and it would crack. By putting a piece of styrene in there and then gluing it in, hopefully that will marry the two pieces together enough so that I don't end up with some flexing going on. There is that strip that I glued in the middle here, and that should keep the top skin of the wing from trying to move independently, which means when I put a smear of filler on there and sand it down, I hopefully won't end up with a crack. You know, I'm amazed by how many times I think I've got something smooth, and then I look at it in the viewfinder of the camera or a phone, and it looks terrible. This little line right here, that's okay, but I've already sanded out 2 or 3 spots before filming this little bit. So I think this is finally ready to glue on to our fuselage. What I've been doing is there's some lines right here that I think are supposed to meet up with the top of the fuselage, and they don't quite do it yet. Like if I put it on, it's probably going to be difficult to see. You can see we've got a little bit of a gap there underneath the wing. So I'm going to see if I can improve that a little bit. I can always mash some white glue in there after I glue it in place, but I'd like to get it as close as I can. So as you can see, we have wings on the corporate jet. And I had recorded a bit discussing the fit of this center section here. And I recorded that and talked about the fit of the seams and things like that. And then I turned off the camera and did some other stuff. And then when I went to record this bit, I found that I didn't have any memory left in my camera, and the battery was dead. Turns out I hadn't turned on filming, I had turned it off. Then I turned it on and recorded a bunch of, nothing much happening. So we have the wings installed as well as the tailplanes. Tailplanes went on really, really good. You can see they turned out dead level without any issues there. So we're going to work on the engine pods next. And I believe I mentioned this in episode 1 or 2, but I made a mold of the turbine faces because they were quite nice. So we'll pop them out right there. So now I've got yet another 2 turbine faces. You may recall that I did the same thing with the intake turbines for the Mi-10. And the nice thing is when you do that sort of thing, it gives you a stock of spare parts that you can use in the future. Certainly easier than scratch building one of these like I did for my F-16. So all I have to do is just pick off a little bit of white glue or PVA glue, and we can put these in the engine pods. Prior to priming, we also want to get our cowling for the Vega put together and installed. Now the engine gets trapped between the cowling halves. Basically you can see there's a little square lug or a square recess and a rectangular one, and they correspond to a rectangular and of course a square one here. The square one was already oversized. I've trimmed that one down, and the rectangular one has to be trimmed as well. It's not the end of the world, but one more little thing that's got to be accomplished. Now, I don't mind this sort of assembly. I can pre-paint the engine, and then I can put a piece of masking tape over it when I prime. If perhaps you were wondering about these 2 large lugs on the front of the fuselage, they mate with these 2 notches here, like that. So you can see by the fact that it wants to focus, the fact that it wants to split this, then I've got a little bit more trimming to do. As well, on the underside of the cowl, you can see that we have 2 blind stubs. I'm pretty sure those are supposed to be the exhausts, so I will be drilling those out in order to create actual pipes. Alright, so in engine news, we have the front compressor of our jet engines for the Falcon. Nothing too exciting there. And then we have our single row radial for the Vega. This isn't the best radial engine I've ever dealt with. Certainly not the worst. Hobbycraft. Basically, I gave the whole thing a coat of Humbrol gunmetal. The spaces between the cylinders, I painted those flat black. The gear case got a light gray, and the push rod covers, they got some Testors flat silver. So I think it basically looks the part. Allow these things to dry off, and then I'll be able to put them in their assorted cowlings. And this is after I've been filing and slicing to try to get the canopy to fit in there better for about 5 or 10 minutes, probably about 10 minutes. So We still have a huge gap there. We're close on the other side here, but you can see the whole thing is getting pinched, and most of that's coming from the wing. So let's get that out of there before we crack it. Now right there I've put a little piece of styrene in on both sides, just because the canopy doesn't quite want to go to the fuselage there. The other thing I'm going to do is, if you look in, you can see this giant, huge, gaping wound up here that we might be able to see through the cockpit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug that up. I've already got a piece of styrene cut for that. So I'm hoping that that blanking plate covers over most of the giant hole, while at the same time letting the canopy go in place properly. We'll see. Now, in marked contrast to the Vega, the cockpit glazing for the Falcon just slides in here really, really nice. Like that. So I don't foresee any difficulty in gluing this in place. Now you can see where the vertical framing is, and we'll be sure to mask that out with some tape before we prime. But you can see that shouldn't pose any problem at all. And I've painted basically the top of the instrument panel black. I've painted the semicircular, semi-oval panels to the sides of the cockpit of the Vega gray, because otherwise you can look into the wing. So you can see just how horrible the visibility from the sides into the front was from this cockpit. If you wanted to look up, boy, there was lots of visibility there. But forward or to the sides, forget it. And here is that panel that's going to hide the top of the wing from the front. Alright, we've got our cockpit glass in, and I've also put the fuselage windows in as well. The door, I've temporarily glued a cross piece on it so we can just put it inside the fuselage and pop it out later. Now it looks like I've got the landing gear fully assembled, but really I've just assembled the struts to the actual wheels and fairings themselves. The rest of them are just pegged in place. The reason for that is there's a scallop of red that has to go on the front here, and it goes down into a V. And I figure that to try to do that, to mask that off with these struts in place is going to be really difficult. But I do want to get these pre-assembled so I can pop them in at a later date. Here's the Falcon 10, which is had all the masking done for painting. The round windows there, or the ovals, have been done with Mascal and masking tape on the windows, or on the cockpit. And I don't want to have the door glued together because it's going to be in the open position. So I've just stuffed this with toilet paper. Same thing with the engine intakes. I'm not worried about the exhausts because there's pipes that need to go in there. In the Vega, I have gone and I've painted all the clear parts, or parts that are going to be clear, of the cockpit, once again with Mascal. Same thing with the fuselage windows. And both of these are going to be painted flat white. And the flat white is usually the best thing to paint over with yellow. And then, of course, the Falcon is going to get a coat of gloss white on top of that. So as you can see, we've got two very white-looking airplanes here. And this will serve as a good base for a nice gloss white on the business jet. And as I mentioned before, yellow is a very hard color to spray. So you really want to make sure that what you're spraying it on is all basically at the same tone, not only the same color, but the same lightness and darkness. Which is why I wanted to make sure that this was totally white. Now, a little bit of the front edge isn't quite as white, but we're going to be having a red decal there, so that shouldn't be a big problem. So, this is where I'm going to leave this project off for this episode. Thanks for watching. Until next time, just keep on modeling.